goodnewsbible.net and then live stream. Okay, I'm going to lead us in prayer. Let's have a minute of silent prayer first. Make sure we're in fellowship, and then we'll get this going. Father, thank you for the beautiful change of weather that you've given us. Thank you that we can assemble with freedom from intimidation and persecution. Give us insight into your word and protect people that are still driving here. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, now the other thing I have to do is call Ben. Ben can't be here, which I don't understand, because if the Cubs lost, he might have an excuse, but the Cubs won, so how he could be in a bad way, I don't know, but I'm going to give him a break and try to call him here. Anyway, open your Bibles to the 12th chapter of Revelation while I'm doing that, and then I'll also start a recording back here. Morning. Revelation chapter 12. Well, he's not even answering, so he must have stayed up for the post-game show is all I can figure. I don't know. Let me shut this thing off so he doesn't call me back, and hopefully we can get going. Hopefully you will remember from last week in Revelation 12 that we saw a picture of Satan persecuting Israel, because Satan opposes the plan of God. Of course, the plan of God is redemption, and so Satan did everything possible to destroy the line of Christ before he was born. Once he came into the world, he tried to destroy him as an infant, but he also tried to destroy him in terms, or not really destroy him, but prevent him from going to the cross, using as illustrious a person as Peter to try to convince him that it wasn't necessary. And we also learned that when Satan fell, he took 1/3 of the angels with him, and they are demons. They work with Satan to oppose the purposes of God. And we also learned that in the time of the tribulation, the 7 years that are yet future, the 7 years that run their course after believers of the church are removed from the earth, during those 7 years, Satan will indwell an individual that we know, well, in Revelation, he's called the beast. In 1 John, he's called the Antichrist. In 2 Thessalonians, he's called the man of sin. Daniel calls him the willful king. The Bible has a lot of terms for this ruler of the revived Roman Empire that will rule the world during the tribulation. And he is a great persecutor of Israel. Hitler was able to kill about 1/3 of the Jewish population of the earth. Antichrist will kill about 2/3 of the Jewish population. And we have, during the tribulation, the persecution of Israel. And we went to Matthew 24, if you remember, where believing Jews in the tribulation are given instructions on what to do when they see the abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation is the midpoint of the tribulation, where Antichrist sets himself up as God and demands to be worshipped, and he puts his throne in the Jewish temple. So at that point, we're in Revelation chapter 12, verse 6. The woman is Israel. We already established that. The man-child is Jesus Christ. The dragon is Satan, but the woman is Israel. Verse 6, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that she might be nourished for 1,260 days. That is the equivalent of 3.5 years. That is the time between the abomination of desolation, the midpoint of the tribulation, and the return of Christ, which is the end of the tribulation. Thank you for the drink. There was war in heaven during this time at the tribulation. We saw this mentioned in Daniel 12 as well. This is Revelation 12:7. There was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war against the dragon and his angels. This is the angelic conflict. This explains a lot of events on earth. And of course, it explains anti-Semitism. Satan's angels were not strong enough to overcome Michael's angels. The good guys win. The great dragon was thrown down, thrown out of heaven. The serpent of old, who is called the devil, and Satan, who deceives the whole world. And of course, the world rejoices because he has been thrown down. We saw in verse 10 last week, he's called by another term, the accuser of the brethren, because he loves to discredit believers. These believers overcame him by the blood of the Lamb because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even to death. These are believers who suffer and die during the tribulation. And because they endured, that is the basis of rejoicing in heaven. But woe, remember, woe constitutes a warning, to say the least. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you. So the devil is now focusing his activity on earth during this intensified stage of difficulty. Verse 13, when the dragon, Satan, saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman. Who's the woman? Israel. And we can confirm that because she gave birth to the child, and the child is the one that will eventually rule over the entire earth. That's back in, what verse is it? Oh, I turned too many pages. The woman gives birth to a man-child, verse 4. 12:5. She, the woman, gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God in his throne. That's Jesus Christ. He came to earth with the intention, by the way, of establishing his kingdom, but he was rejected, so he didn't. He died. He was caught up to heaven, but he will in one future day. The earthly reign of Christ is not eliminated, it's simply postponed until this period of time that includes the church age and the tribulation runs its course. So the dragon turns all of his sights against Israel because in order for there to be an earthly kingdom, Israel has to survive. See, it's a Jewish-based kingdom. Jesus rules the world from Jerusalem. And so if Satan can exterminate the Jewish race, as he has made several attempts, undoubtedly Satan was behind Hitler and his cronies during World War II, where a third of the population of Jews was wiped out. Antichrist will wipe out 2/3. Satan is behind all of this. So he persecutes the woman, Israel, who gave birth to the male child. Verse 14, and 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order that she might fly into the wilderness. Now, those of you that have been around for more than 50 years will recall what happened when the Russians tried to isolate Berlin, Germany, from the outside world. And the United States came to the rescue by doing what? An airlift. Well, it's interesting that biblical writers are going to use the language of their day. So it has been speculated, and I think with pretty good. The purpose of these wings is to get the Jews out of Jerusalem to a safe place. Now, I don't know whether the United States comes to the rescue. I can't say dogmatically, but what's our rule of biblical interpretation? If it makes sense in the literal sense, seek no other sense, right? Well, it's pretty hard to make sense of an eagle carrying several million people, right? But if you were writing in the first century and describing people being evacuated on airplanes, this is a pretty good picture. And I kind of humorously point out that when Jesus gives the warning in Matthew 24, telling Jews to escape, he says, pray that your flight is not in winter. Now, that's pushing it a little bit. But I see this, since it doesn't make sense as a great eagle, how would be, and remember, this is going to take place in the future. Now, John didn't know anything about airplanes or jets or airlifts, and so he uses the best language he can to describe this air evacuation. What does it say? 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place. What is this? This is a special protective zone where Jews can seek refuge, and somehow they are protected. We're not given all that much detail, but it's not unfathomable to me that these people are evacuated out of Jerusalem by air and taken to a place of refuge somewhere. All we're told is that it's in the wilderness, and people have speculated that it might be somewhere in Israel. It could be, but all we know is she's protected and she's nourished for a time, 1 year, times 2 years, 1 + 2 = 3, and half a time. How many times have we seen it? The tribulation, the last half of the tribulation, undoubtedly is the most documented period in history, in that he says it's 42 months, it's 3.5 years, it's 1260. You can't get it wrong. Obviously, it's intended to be a literal period of time. And again, that period of time runs from the abomination of desolation, the midpoint of the tribulation, where Antichrist demands to be worshipped in the Jewish temple, until the second coming of Christ. Times and a half a time. During that 3.5 year period, there is special protection for Israel, because without this protection, undoubtedly they would be wiped out. Now, the instructions that Jesus gives in Matthew 24 pertain to this. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, get out of town. Don't bother to go in the house to get your stuff. Get out of town. And among the Jews on earth, what Jews are going to listen to that advice? Believing Jews, right? Most of the Jews on earth today don't believe the New Testament. They don't give any credibility to Matthew, even though Matthew was a respected Jew. Well, I don't know how respected. He was a tax collector. But he's a documented Jew who wrote for the purpose of showing Israel that Jesus was the Messiah. He was their king. He's the Son of God. So it's the believing Jews, for the most part, that are going to listen to the advice that Jesus gives, and they're going to take these means, whatever it is, an airlift or whatever. If you want them flying on a literal eagle, well, good luck with that. Take a big eagle, I guess. But the point is, they're evacuated to a safe place. For 3.5 years, they're protected. They're protected from the presence of the serpent, and of course the serpent is behind all the maneuverings of the Antichrist to destroy them. Well, the serpent's not done. He pours forth water like a river out of his mouth. Now, are we to take that literally or figuratively? Well, it's certainly conceivable that the serpent, Satan, would have the ability to produce some sort of a large-scale flood. Satan is capable of producing cosmic events. If you read the book of Job, Satan was able to bring on a windstorm that flattened the houses of all of his children were killed, but I guess they were in one house. So Satan can cause storms and winds and other things. So is it inconceivable that he could cause this flood? Whether he uses means that are mechanical or natural is not stated, but it's conceivable to me that this could be a literal flood, more conceivable than a literal eagle, right? I've never heard or seen of anything like that, but certainly we've seen floods all over the world, and so perhaps Satan causes some sort of a flood in an attempt to penetrate this protected area where these believing Jews are spending this 3.5-year period. So I take the flood as literal. Some Bible teachers do not. But the basic rule of biblical interpretation, if it makes sense in the literal sense, seek no other sense. If it absolutely does not make sense, then you got to look for something else. And of course, if there's anything in the Scripture that uses the term like or as, that sort of points us that this represents something else. There's a similarity. Now, frankly, it doesn't say two wings like a great eagle. It says two wings of the great eagle. Well, you can figure that out for yourself, but that's the best I can come up with. So Satan causes this flood. For what purpose? To destroy the surviving Jews. Jesus says to those Jews, run for your life, get out of town, don't wait, don't get your stuff. Pray that your flight, no pun intended, your flight does not take place in winter. And I feel badly for women with babies because it's more difficult for them to run, but you have to run and perhaps fly to this designated protected area. But Satan doesn't give up. He causes this flood, but as a counter response, verse 16, the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth. Now you say that must be figurative. Well, I don't know, because I've read about that. Haven't you? Remember Dathan and Abiram and all their cronies? They rebelled against Moses, and they tried to intrude into the priesthood. And how did God deal with that situation? The earth opened up and swallowed them and their families, and I think their houses. Well, living in Florida, well, not just Florida, I read about a major sinkhole in Tennessee that swallowed the Corvette Museum. So these things are not unheard of. So this is very possibly, logically, to be interpreted literally. As is a literal flood, there is a literal opening or absorption in the earth, and the flood is absorbed. It drank up the river which the dragon poured out on his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman because he can't get the best of her. Satan has been trying to destroy Israel. I was talking to a group of Jewish men in a synagogue where I was working. Just a casual conversation. I was just doing my job. I wasn't preaching. And I don't know how the conversation got started, but I said, you know, one of the things that convinces me, these are Jewish unbelievers, so they probably thought I was from another planet, but I said, one of the things that convinces me of the reality of anti-Semitism, let me back up. I said, that's not what I said. One of the things that convinces me of the reality of a personal devil, because most Jews don't believe that. Most Jews don't believe in the supernatural. I said, one of the things that convinces me of the reality of a personal devil is anti-Semitism. I said, you know why? I said, because you guys aren't that bad. You're really not that obnoxious that the whole world should hate you. And there have been all these movements to exterminate Jews. I can think of more obnoxious people. So I don't know if they bought my argument or not. But anti-Semitism is unexplainable on a human level. When you look at all of the contributions Jews have made to the world, yes, they're very successful, They have a higher per capita income than perhaps any nationality on earth. They're hard workers. They're ambitious. They're driven. But why have there been so many attempts to exterminate them throughout history? Well, I think the answer is right here. It's Satan himself. And I think certainly there was evidences of occult activity in the Third Reich. You know, Hitler wasn't a Christian. I mean, there are probably Jews that think that, but he wasn't. Satan was behind that. And Satan has been behind many other attempts through history, going back to the Old Testament. We're in the Persian Empire. Now, Persian Empire was huge. You know, Persian Empire was a lot bigger than the Third Reich. And in the Persian Empire, the official policy is to kill every Jew. We're going to have an appointed day, and it's going to be open season. It's like every Jew will have a target on their back, and you can use them for target practice, only it's not practice, it's the real thing. And history is filled with things like that. And this is the most intensified attempt yet. The dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring. And notice, these are Jewish believers. They will be saved. We know of 144,000 Jewish evangelists and a whole multitude of people, innumerable, that come to know the true God as a result of their ministry. You also have the preaching of Moses and Elijah. That's going to get the attention of some Jews. So there are probably a higher, much higher percentage of born-again Jews on earth during the tribulation than there are today. These Jews keep the commandments of God and, get this, hold to the testimony of Jesus. Now, there are many Jews today that hold to the testimony of Jesus, but indication is there will be more. Now we move back to this sinister creature. He's not a creature, he's a man. He's almost a Superman, but we met him back in Daniel. And we simply build on that foundation. We get more information. This man is called the beast in Revelation 13. The term Antichrist comes from 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. And a couple other verses in 1 John refer to Antichrist. He's called the man of sin, the man of lawlessness. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 through 9 describe his career. We also saw him in Daniel chapter 7 as the little horn. Daniel chapter 11 as the willful king. This guy is a very important figure in history. Remember, we saw his prototype, if you please. We saw a little guy, comparatively, Antiochus Epiphanes, who lived about 160 years before Christ, who was a preview of Antichrist. For what reason? There's really two reasons that were two strongest reasons for identifying Antiochus as a prefigure of Antichrist. Anybody want to take a guess at what were those two things that Antiochus did that make him so much like the Antichrist? Abomination of desolation. He sacrificed a pig and desecrated the temple. So that's the historical abomination of desolation, which is a picture of the real thing that takes place in the tribulation. And then more generally, his policies toward who? Israel. Yeah, he was the greatest anti-Semite of the Old Testament, but he didn't have near the sphere of influence. He controlled Syria and Egypt, which Syria included Israel. For a time, he went back and forth fighting with Egypt. So his sphere of influence was relatively small. Antichrist in the tribulation rules the world. So the Jews are at a much greater risk. So, first of all, in 13, it says he stood on the shore of on the sand of the seashore. Now, if it's he, I think we'd have to take that back to verse 17 of the previous chapter, the dragon. The problem is, in the Greek, there's a one-letter difference between he and I. And so Bible scholars are equally split, and frankly, you don't have to jump on either bandwagon because it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Who's standing on the beach? Was it John? Well, I think so, because he saw. So I think I would be more comfortable with the translation I. And the problem is you have some manuscripts that have one have the other. And so you can't really determine which one it is, but it doesn't really affect the outcome. Either the dragon is standing on the beach or John's standing on the beach. And the fact that John saw something coming up out of the water argues more strongly that he was standing there. If you see something coming up out of the water, you got to be standing on the beach. He stood, I stood, John stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast. Now, a beast means a living being. It can be an animal, it can be a man. The reason he uses the word beast is this is a man whose characteristics have already been described in animal-like terms. Remember, we saw different things contributing to the career of Antichrist by studying those kingdoms that came before. The lion and the leopard and those other animals, the bear. Thank you. You've been paying attention. All right. So this beast comes out of the sea. Now, in the Bible, if you were to do a little investigating of the sea, it is typically used as a symbol for disorganized humanity, specifically Gentiles, in contrast to the land or the earth that usually refers to Israel. So the sea, there's no evidence that this beast is a fish or a whale or a crocodile or anything else that comes up out of the sea. He's a man. And he comes out of the sea. We use that term today, a sea of humanity. The Bible says in Psalm 58, the wicked are like the troubled sea when it cannot rest. And so this guy comes out of humanity. Now, we're given 10 figures, 10 horns and 7 figures, 7 heads. Now, we covered Daniel before we covered Revelation so that we would get the background, because we're introduced to these 10 horns. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that until we get to Revelation 17, where we're told more specifically about what these represent. Now, in Bible prophecy, it is very common, it is almost a rule, that kings and kingdoms are used interchangeably. That's not that far-fetched. Now, I was just talking about Adolf Hitler. Now, did Adolf Hitler personally kill 6 million Jews? No. He had lots and lots of help from misled Germans, because the whole country of Germany, with all of its resources and industrial might and economic power, all worked together to carry out Adolf's little pipe dream. But we do that today. So we use a leader, in this case Hitler was the chancellor, whether he's a king or a president, we use that almost interchangeably. If we talk about Stalin, we're probably talking about Russia before and during World War II. Well, the Bible does this very consistently in prophetic passages, a king and a kingdom. So this beast represents a king, a man, the Antichrist, but it also represents his kingdom. Now, what do we know about his kingdom? It has 10 horns and 7 heads. Now, as I said, we're going to hold detail on that until Revelation 17, because that's where we get the detail. But let me tell you this much. The 10 horns. A horn is the symbol of power, but more specifically, because of what we learned in Daniel, a Gentile king. 10 Gentile nations are dominant in the world at this time. And there is a relationship to the Roman Empire. That's why we come up with the concept of a revived Roman Empire. Remember in Daniel 9, the people of the prince who is to come will destroy Jerusalem. Now that happened in 70 AD. Now the prince wasn't there. The prince is still future. That's this guy. That's the beast. But his people destroyed Jerusalem. Well, anybody who knows anything about the history of Rome and Jerusalem in the first century knows that the Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem, burned it to the ground, leveled it, didn't leave one stone standing on another. That happened in 70 AD. So that means there's a relationship between the Antichrist. He is the ruler of the future Roman Empire. Now, he gets his power by taking control of a coalition of nations that probably occupy the same general area as the Roman Empire. So the 10 horns represent 10 kings who give their authority to Antichrist. That's really how he comes to power. He has to knock off a few of them with force, but then the rest of them seem to recognize his invincibility, and they voluntarily give their power to Antichrist. That is the foundation of his worldwide rule. So, suffice it to say that the 10 horns rule simultaneously. In other words, they're all in control at the same time, and then they give their power to the beast. The 7 heads are not, they are mentioned by Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7. The 7 heads are successive kingdoms, one after the other. Now, there's some debate. That's why I'm going to save it till Revelation 17. But it's possible that this goes back to Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome and the revived Roman Empire, if you please. But we'll take that up. But the big difference between the horns and the heads, they're all political entities. They're all kingdoms. But the horns are simultaneous. They rule at the same time. The heads are successive. More on that later on. On his heads were blasphemous names. This is a godless empire. Verse 2, the beast which I saw. This is the ruler and his kingdom. The beast, this is the world ruler during the tribulation. The beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was the mouth of like the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power. Now, where have we seen those 3 animals used? Daniel 7. Very good. Let's look at Daniel 7. Daniel chapter 7. It's in the Old Testament. It's after Ezekiel. It's before Hosea. You got Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Okay, Daniel 7. Daniel sees this vision in 553 BC, and he sees 4 beasts coming up out of the sea, the same sea of humanity. The winds of heaven were stirring on the great sea, Daniel 7, 2, and 3. 4 beasts different from one another. Now, we've been through this. Hopefully you remember. Hopefully you took some notes. The first was like a lion. Now, based on what we learned in Daniel chapter 2, the leopard had wings. The lion was the symbol of Babylon, empire number 1 in Daniel's prophecy. He started with the time in which he lived and went from there. The first lion kingdom, you're right, it does say wings of an eagle. Later on you have a leopard with wings. All right, the first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. That corresponds to the Medo-Persian Empire. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard. The leopard was faster than the lion because the leopard had 4 wings. And what could be faster than a 4-winged leopard? That's Greece under Alexander the Great, the rapidity of his conquests. And another one, indescribable. A fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, extremely strong with large iron teeth. Now that is the kingdom of Rome, but then it expands because it has 10 horns, corresponding to what we saw in Revelation. The revived Roman Empire is based on a 10-nation confederation. And you've got the little horn who utters great boasts. That's Antichrist. Now, if you notice, the beast of Revelation is composite. What do I mean by that? He's part lion, he's part bear, and this isn't literal. These are characteristics of these former empires. But this is one of the most fascinating and intriguing things about the revived Roman Empire, is its composite nature. In more ways than one, it's composite. But the final empire is, if you please, part lion, part bear, part leopard, and then he's this iron-teethed, 10-toed beast that is beyond description. Now, to confirm that, go back to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, you'll remember, is the foundation of all Bible prophecy, because Daniel begins with his own day and uses a statue moving from head to foot to say the same thing that he just said in chapter 7, that there will be 4 major empires beginning with the empire in which Daniel served. Daniel worked as an exile in Babylon. So, in Daniel's vision of chapter 2, verse 32, you have the head made of fine gold. That's Babylon. You say, how do we know? Verse 36, this is the interpretation. You, O king, who's he talking to? Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. You are the head of gold. Verse 38, 626 to 538 BC, the Babylonian Empire. After you, verse 39, another kingdom inferior. That's the chest and arms of silver. Inferior. The Medo-Persians were not as high a quality in terms of government as the Babylonians. Another kingdom inferior to you, that's Medo-Persia, 538 to 333 BC. And then there will be another kingdom of bronze that will rule over all the earth. That's the Greek Empire of Alexander, 333 to 63 BC. And then there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters. That's Rome, 63 to whatever you want, around 450 or 500 AD. Subject for debate among historians. All right. So Daniel introduces us to 4 empires. He goes from the historic Roman Empire, which are the legs, to the future revived Roman Empire, which are the feet and the toes. And hopefully you were here for Daniel and you remember it. This is all on the website if you want to go back and listen to it. Now, what I want you to see is that in verse 34, Daniel 2:34, you continued looking. You saw this vision, Nebuchadnezzar. I'm explaining it to you, says Daniel. You saw this vision, and you saw, after you saw this statue, head to foot, that represents Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, you saw a stone, rock, a figure of the Lord Jesus Christ, repeatedly, Old and New Testament. Jesus told Peter, on this rock. What was the rock? Peter's confession that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. On this rock I will build my church. And Peter himself says he's a living stone. He's the foundation of the church. So you continued looking until Jesus Christ, if you please, until Jesus Christ, the stone cut without hands, struck the statue on its feet. What does that mean? Jesus doesn't come back during the Babylonian or Medo-Persian or Greek era. He comes back the second time during the time of the revived Roman Empire. He didn't, when he came in the first time, he didn't strike down the Roman Empire. So that's not in view. A lot of his followers would have liked that, but he didn't. He struck the empire of the feet, which is the revived Roman Empire, which means the second advent of Jesus is still future. But look at verse 35. And this is where I was going with this, by talking about a composite empire. This is what makes the empire of the tribulation a super unprecedented empire. Then, the iron and the clay. Well, you would expect that, because that's where the stone lands, on the feet of iron and clay. They're naturally destroyed. When Jesus comes, he will destroy the revived Roman Empire, but also the bronze, representing Medo-Persia, the silver, and the gold, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, are all crushed at the same time. What does that tell you? That this Antichrist will incorporate everything significant in all the empires that came before. See, there are certain things of antiquity that have been lost. Remember, who's the head of gold? Gold is the highest quality. That's Babylon. There were some things in Babylon that have never been duplicated, and ditto with the others. So this last empire is a composite empire that incorporates everything that came before it. All the glory of Babylon and the military genius of the Medes and the Persians and the swiftness of Alexander the Great, they're all included in this super empire that controls the world during this 7-year period. All right, our time is up. We'll continue in Revelation 13. Yes, Tom? I've never heard that connection. I don't know. But I have read in a number of books that these animals were symbols of these countries. At the Palace of Babylon, they had lion statues. And in some way, these other animals, just like our country, we use the eagle as a symbol of America. All right, more on that, and we'll get more detail as we go, and hopefully this will clear up. But you may want to go back and listen to the studies in Daniel if you got lost today. Men, we'll go have a time of prayer, and then we'll get into Romans 2.